Good morning and good evening. My name is Brent Habig. I am Vice President for the International Programs at the Institute for Sustainable Communities, and it is my pleasure and honor to welcome you to this webinar on behalf of ISC. I'll start by extending a warm welcome to our event sponsors, USAID and Energy Foundation China. ISC is extremely appreciative of both your participation today and of your long-standing support of ISC's programming. Before I dive in, I'll share a few technical notes. This webinar will be recorded and shared with all registered attendees for later viewing. The recording will also be posted on ISC's website. We will have audience Q&A towards the end of the session. Please send your questions through the Q&A feature found at the bottom of your screen. This will be open for the duration of the webinar, so feel free to submit questions at any point. Please include your name, organization, and the city you are joining us from. Please note that the chat function is disabled, so if you encounter any technical issues, please submit a question through the Q&A feature and someone will reach out to help. By way of quick introduction to the Institute for Sustainable Communities, our mission is to help communities around the world address environmental, economic, and social challenges to build a better future shaped and shared by all. We work in the United States and across Asia. Our approach ensures that solutions emerge from within the community rather than being imposed from the outside. We center people in our efforts to accelerate climate change and economic development, seeking to advance equity and climate in lockstep. China is at the core of ISC's global portfolio. Since 2007, ISC has supported cities, manufacturers, and communities in China to reduce GHG emissions, improve environmental health, and to accelerate sustainable development. China plays a special role in ISC's portfolio, offering the opportunity to rapidly pilot and scale approaches that we then share across our networks in the US and throughout Asia. This webinar has two objectives. The first is to share ISC's learnings from our Low Emission Cities Alliance, or the LECA program. LECA is a 3-year program designed to accelerate the emissions peaking of Chinese cities. The second objective is to situate learnings from LECA about early peaking into the urgent task of developing long-term strategies, especially in light of China's groundbreaking commitment to realize net zero emissions by 2060. Our speakers today will offer insights from leading development partners, including USAID and the Asian Development Bank, and from climate research institutions, including WRI, Tsinghua University, New Climate Institute, Hunan Low Carbon Innovation Center, and the China Quality Certification Center. But before we dive into the details of emissions peaking and net zero planning, I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of what's at stake alongside the urgent environmental goals underlying this work. It's easy to get caught up in the enormous technical challenges that long-term strategies and net zero planning present. But as we grapple with these technical challenges, we cannot lose sight that long-term planning also presents powerful opportunities to address the inequities present in every human society. Our societies today are neither fair nor equitable. They consistently and disproportionately benefit some while disadvantaging or excluding others. Our efforts to address climate change must also address these underlying societal inequities. In order to do this, we must center equity in our climate action via inclusive and participatory planning. And if we don't do this, then we will ensure that the worst effects of climate change will continue to fall most heavily on the most vulnerable. So let's commit to charting a new course toward a future that is both zero carbon and pro-people, and to a future that ensures our collective safety and health, supports the vulnerable, and offers equal opportunity to all. And with that introduction, it is my pleasure to invite our first speaker, Angela Hogg, the Director of the Regional Environment Office at USAID Regional Development Mission for Asia. Angela has served as the Director of the Regional Environment Office in RDMA in Bangkok since 2017. Prior to that, Angela worked with USAID in Bangladesh, Cambodia, and Mozambique across a wide range of programs, including community forestry, protected area management, non-timber forest products, combating wildlife trafficking, and coastal urban adaptation. Angela, welcome.
Thank you, Brent. On behalf of the United States Agency for International Development and the Regional Development Mission for Asia, it's my pleasure to be with you today and share in the accomplishments of the Low Emission City Alliance, or LECA program. USAID recognizes what we all instinctively understand, that the air we breathe, the water we drink, the environment we share, and the global ecosystem that sustains us transcends boundaries and national interests. Securing a healthy planet and safeguarding the world's natural resources requires international cooperation, collaboration, and commitment. Our collective future depends on how well we work together. USAID's Regional Development Mission for Asia is uniquely positioned to advance that collective purpose. RDMA helps countries across Asia work together to ensure a prosperous future and improve environmental health. As the director of RDMA's Regional Environment Office, I oversee a portfolio of activities throughout Asia that deliver on one of our key development objectives, transforming regional energy and environmental systems so that they are cleaner, smarter, more efficient, and more resilient, better able to ensure the health and prosperity of the people of Asia and of the world. The LECA program plays a critical role in these efforts. China is the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, which are closely correlated with air and other pollution that adversely affects the people of China, Asia, and the world. Air pollution is one of the largest contributors of non-communicable diseases and deaths, attributed to 7 million annual deaths globally, 4 million in Asia, and 1.6 million in China alone. Reducing carbon dioxide and air pollutants prevents disease and saves lives. In China's cities, home to more than 60% of China's people, and a massive share of its heavy industry, power generation, and ground transportation sectors, play an outsized role in generating China's air emissions. Chinese cities represent the front line in any effort to promote sustainable growth and a healthy environmental future for Asia. Over the past several years, the LECA program has deployed key aspects of USAID's strategy for promoting environmental health and low emissions development, which emphasizes strengthening the capacity of cities and local governments. First, to engage in strategic, transparent, and inclusive planning processes. And second, to adopt smart, efficient strategies for managing natural resources and the impacts of their consumption. Over the course of the program, LECA partnered with 13 major Chinese cities who will complete and implement comprehensive low-emission development plans. LECA has established the go-to model and methodologies for urban early emissions peaking efforts in China and has documented these in a comprehensive guidebook for emissions peaking and planning, recognized as one of the best target-based urban climate action guides in China. Some examples of LECA's results include a projected annual reduction of 4.2 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in Zhengchang, driven by inclusive land use, renewable energy, and public transportation programs in low-income communities. In another example, Guangzhou projects a reduction of 18 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030, with half of these savings coming from reductions in harmful air emissions generated by industrial sources. Changsha, a steel-producing city of 7 million, projects 28 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent reduced by 2030, along with an 80% drop in air pollution. LECA worked with Changsha to go even further, drafting a 2050 deep decarbonization roadmap that aims to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 70% over the next 30 years. These outcomes point the way for cities throughout China and across Asia and the world to reduce greenhouse gas and air pollution emissions and improve environmental health. USAID is excited to participate in celebrating these achievements and to share best practices from the LECA program with you today and with the world. The program offers practical, concrete insight on how to achieve deep decarbonization relevant for cities everywhere. And with incoming President Biden expected to renew the US government's commitment to addressing climate change, this is the perfect time for us to reflect on the lessons that we've learned on low emissions development and discuss how to tackle the challenges that remain. We'd like to thank everyone involved with making this program a success and look forward to seeing how others in Asia will carry this vital work forward to secure a better future for all. Thank you, Brent.
Thank you, Angela, for your kind remarks and for USAID's support of this important work. You've pointed out the important interlinkages between GHG, air quality, and health, and the regional nature of these challenges and opportunities. Your mention of the president-elect is, of course, quite exciting. Many of us are excited for the US to resume its commitment to climate action under the incoming administration. So we eagerly await the events tomorrow. With that, thanks so much, Angela. I'll now shift to Stephen Zheng, who will share an overview of the LECA program and its major achievements. Stephen Zheng is the chief of party of the project. Stephen has championed climate action and the energy transition for over 20 years. He brings extensive experience in accelerating climate action in China through engaging policymakers, think tanks, NGOs, businesses, communities, and international donors. He's also led multilateral programs that improve environmental protection, advance rural energy, and support community development and poverty alleviation. Stephen, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you, everyone. Good morning, good evening. It's my great opportunity to briefly introduce you about the achievements and impact of our Low Emission City Alliance program. So this is a 3 years program funded by USAID and Energy Foundation China. So next slide, please. Yeah, so for our LECA program, the goal of this program is to advance low carbon development and accelerate emission reductions in Chinese urban areas. There are 3 major project tasks. So the first one is to working with our 13 selected pilot cities to improve the capacity, technical capacity of the city local leaders and institutions to help the cities to assess and plan and implement low carbon development. So the second task is to really to expand our technical assistance throughout the Chinese cities in the area of low carbon development. And the third task is about policy work. It's to increase our low carbon policy recommendations and the best practice at both national and the sub-national levels. Yeah, next slide, please. So I want to give you a little bit background of why we, how we design, our program activities. So as you may know, at the national level, China is the largest, GHG emitter in the world, and also China's emission indeed has a significant impact on air quality and health. And also, China has over 600 cities, which totally generate over 80% of the national, carbon emissions. And also, as you may know, China has made a commitment to peak its, carbon GHG emissions by 2030. And also, last year, Chinese government has announced an ambitious goal to reach carbon neutrality by 2060. Now, we can see that cities are the major, arena for us to work on. And also there is ambitious targets, but then the question is, how we get there. So we had a needs assessment with Chinese cities, and we found there is really a big gap, on how city to react towards realize the ambitious goals. So from the city side, we found that China cities face major capacity challenges in terms of how to achieve peaking, GHG peaking, and air quality improvement. The major knowledge gap there is, city, I would say city policymakers, and generally lacking of knowledge and experience of climate change and greenhouse gas emission control or low carbon development and air pollution control. And also there is little experience or relevant models for cities to follow, to make changes. And also there is few tools available for cities to use to identify and access the reduction opportunities. In addition, cities are also generally lacking of skills to engage public sectors and the civil society into the carbon emission reduction process. So this is a general background, how we come up with our program design. So next slide, please. So that's how we come up with the design of 3 pillars, for our LACA program. So the first pillar is our city program. So we're working with 13 pilot cities to support them to adopt and implement low GHG emission plans. And also, beyond our pilot work, we also have a comprehensive capacity building program that is, to help city policy practitioners in design the strategy and making their plans. And also we has developed training of trainer curriculum that aims to help city practitioners to learn, to manage, to utilize the knowledge to support more cities. And also we have as the third pillar is policy pillar. For this one, we have worked very closely with our partner Energy Foundation China, promote low emission laws, policies, and standards, and also based on our city cases and the best practice we developed, we disseminate those knowledge through our partners and peer organizations, and so that we promote the adoption of learning at a national scale. So next slide, please. So here are, this is, the 13, pilot cities we worked with. From this China map, you can see there are 13 cities across 9 provinces. So there are, our eastern side, the more economically developed region. We have a middle region cities. We also have some western region cities where there's less socially and economically developed. So the 13 cities are well representing, the 600, Chinese cities. Next slide, please. Yeah, so for our LACA program, we paid, special attention to the inclusive emission planning process. So especially we prioritizing the participation of women in our capacity building and the planning activities. From the from this slide, you can see, among the technical assistance days offered, 58% were provided by our women experts, and among all the participants who completed training with our programs, 55% are women. And also for the TOT trainers who participated in our 3 TOT workshops, almost also, half of them are women. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, let's talk about some of our achievement of our city pilot work. So under the topic of city early planning, early picking, and the climate action plans, we have worked with Xiangtan, Zhuzhou, Wuzhong, Yinchuan city to support the city government to develop city early picking and climate action plans. And in Jiaxing city in Zhejiang province, we supported Jiaxing to develop early picking and a climate action plan in their textile and CHP industry sectors. And under the topic of long-term and deep decarbonization topic, we has worked with Changsha city to help them to develop 2050 pathways to the carbon neutrality. We worked closely with Guangdong province, with our partner CQC, which will make a presentation later on, and develop a guidebook for near zero emission zones. In Jinghua city, in Zhejiang province, we support the city to develop a low carbon action plan and a 2035 low carbon roadmap. And for Jiyuan city, in Henan province, Jiyuan is a heavy industry city. Then we help them to develop city low carbon development plans of from 2021 to 2035. Next slide, please. Yeah, then we also have the done some specific sector specific work. The first one is transportation. So transportation is a very important sector that generates a lot of GHG emission and air pollution. So we worked with Kunming city, the transport sector, to support them to develop early picking and air pollution control plan. And also we work with one industry park, in Changsha. We help them to design of a near zero carbon emission transport hub. And also another city is Tianjin. This is also another city with more than 10 million population. So we worked with the city local institutions and municipal government departments and develop a cooperative control model of air pollution control and greenhouse gas control in the transportation sector. And we also look at waste management issues. So in 2 cities, one is Zhongshan city in Guangdong province. We helped the city to the low carbon community to develop a business model and low carbon community guidance for smart waste management system for their communities. In Baoding city in Hebei province, we also worked with the local development reform commission, the local government, and the local institutions, and develop a low carbon community guideline and also smart waste management system for their communities. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so those are above are a few highlights of our city pilots work. Then we also conducted the capacity building activities. So here I want to give you a few examples on what we done during the past 3 years. So under the topic of early picking planning events, we organized a few, like in Hangzhou, in Jiyuan, in Yinchuan, in Beijing. So it's with the participants, generally between 100 to 200 participants. So we also organized the sector-specific training events, such as we have organized green finance and carbon markets training in Shanghai together with partners like ABB and the Shanghai Jiao Tong University, and also with the Yinchuan organize such a workshop and the Changsha as well. And also for low carbon community development work, we have a training in Zhengchang last year. Besides our training activities in China, we also had the organized capacity building or events globally. So a couple of examples are, we had co-organized workshop on city carbon emission and air pollution control and co-management at ADB's Asian Pacific Forum on low carbon technologies for consecutively 2 years in Changsha. And we also presented, we also co-organized actually a side event of China local actions on combating climate change at COP24 and 25. We has organized our some of the city cases to share experience, have a peer exchange with international cities. Next slide. Yeah, here I'll just give you just a few photos and to show about what our capacity building and the training events look like. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, here are some examples of our tools and the publications we generated from this study. I want to point out, like, we have developed a guidebook, for city, carbon emission, picking roadmap and action plans. So this has been widely distributed, in China, and also the other, reports shows about some examples of the, the cities already picking plans and the roadmaps, and the work, work on near zero emissions in Guangdong province as well. Yeah. So next slide. Yeah, here is just a photo that actually in November last year we organized a major event as part of our Philo events. We worked with a national climate change strategy center, and together with also Energy Foundation China, we co-organized the China Forum, on our carbon emission, already picking for the key regions and cities in China. So the event has been very successful, has drawn over 200 participants, online and on site, to these major events, this learning and sharing opportunity. Yeah, next slide, please. So at these major events, we has distributed our guidebook, and we had organized the cities to have a peer learning and sharing opportunities. And we also got attention from the high level government officials, such as we got the Vice Minister of Ministry of Environment and Ecology to come to make opening remarks at our workshop. Yeah, next slide, please. So yeah, here is a very short summary of the achievements of this program. This 3 years program has projected a cumulative GHG reductions of 75 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030, which is equivalent to emission from 60 million passenger cars avoided for 1 year, 19 coal-fired power plants displaced for 1 year, and 2 times of the GHG footprint of Boston, Denver, or Atlanta. So there are over 700 practitioners have increased their capacity. We have trained and supported 35 organizations, developed 36 tools and guidebooks, and we have recommended over 52 policies for local and national government. And we also, this program also leveraged over $5 million as a match funding to our activities. So this is a very quick introduction of our program, our achievements and the impact so far. So with that, I want to thank you for your attention. So I return to you, Brent.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks so much for sharing the major learnings and achievements from the LECA program. LECA has demonstrated that early peaking of large Chinese cities is both feasible and impactful. And we encourage our audience to reach out if they're interested in using any of the tools that you've mentioned or in benefiting from any of the case studies that we developed under the LECA program. So up next, we have two of the Chinese partners under LECA who helped implement this work, and they will share each one short case study of their work. First, I'm happy to invite Zhang Fan from the Hunan Innovation Low Carbon Center. Zhang Fan is an environmental economics scholar, the founder of the Hunan Innovative Low Carbon Center. He's a consultant to the Asian Development Bank and an expert advising the low carbon development planning of Hunan province. Zhang Fan, welcome, and please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you, everyone. Good morning and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This discussion and workshop, and that's a quite good opportunities. So let me show you a case about Changsha, how to do the low carbon development. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah. Actually, I want to talk about just one general introduction of Changsha City, and next I want to tell you a story about I see as how to help low carbon development basement work, and then the third one tell some kind of ideas about the future. Okay, next.
Zhang Fan, your audio is cutting in and out. I don't know if there's any way that we can improve that. It's just cutting out every few seconds.
Okay, next please. Next please. Okay, so Changsha, as you know, is the capital of Hunan province with a total area of 11,800 square kilometers and a population of 8.39 million. In 2019, the GDP reached 1,157 trillion yuan. Next one, please. Okay. Changsha is a national civilized city, a national forest city, and a national ecological garden city. It has been, what I want to say, it has been rated as the happiest city in China for 12 consecutive years. Changsha's total energy consumption reached 31 million tons of standard coal in 2019. The two charts show Changsha's energy composition and greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon dioxide emission from energy consumption reached 55.35 million tons in 2019. Okay, next one. Next one, please. Yeah. Changsha was approved as a national pilot low carbon city in 2017. ICS has been providing comprehensive consulting services and capacity building for Changsha since that year. So please, next one. From the beginning of the research on GHG emission picking in Changsha, to assisting Changsha to set up a special low carbon funding, to assisting in the formulation of medium and long-term low carbon planning, to last year for Changsha to carry out a long-term strategy research on deep decarbonization. ISC's intellectual supports is closely linked to every steps of Changsha's low carbon development. More important, the international team pays great attention to the localization of all the advice. That is, whether it is adopted by the local government or whether it produces real policies and is cooperated into the governance of the local government. That's really concern about the international team. Okay, next one. So After analyzing several scenarios, the international team proposed that Changsha will emit 72.54 million tons of CO2 when it's emission peaking in 2025. At the same time, the potential of each key field and the industries to contribute to emission peaking is sorted out like this chart. This method is quite agreed by the peaking analysis method guideline, which is proposed last year later of the central governments. So I think that's really agreed with the central government's viewpoints. Okay, next one. Yeah, from the perspective of deep decarbonization, it is predicted that by 2050, Changsha's carbon emissions can be reduced by 71% compared with the level of 2015. Around this goal, put forward the energy, industry, construction, transportation field, concrete implementation plan. Next one, please. Okay, based on this solid and internationally assisted research, Changsha has these several pathway decarbonization. Okay, next one. For now, Changsha just do three major things. The first, a new governance system led by the main leaders, the mayors of the municipal governments was established based on the consultation. This approach breaks through the limitation of the ecological and environmental departments, not just the ecological and environmental departments to focus on climate change. All the departments enable the governments to better coordinate the participation of various departments in Changsha to join in focus on the low carbon development and the climate change issue. Okay, next one. The second is to build a better data management system to assist the governments in its decision-making and to mark the gap with the proposed peaking roadmap based on the annual emission inventory. So that's really useful. Okay, next one. The third work is an annual special fund of 30 billion RMB has been set up to support the application of innovative low carbon technologies and solutions in Changsha. And more concrete demonstration cases has been launched. Please, next one. Yeah, okay. For the time limited, let me allow me to give some working inspiration. With the central government's carbon peak and carbon neutral targets. Till now, local governments, local city governments at all levels, the municipal level and the city level, are full of ambitions for the future development transformation. I think there are two things that we want our international partners to focus on. The first one is under the pressure of carbon neutrality, how to build local confidence to choosing a high quality development model is very important. So please provide more cases of international cities which adapting the development of the development model of transition. We are in great need of this international experience. So please give us more cases. The secondly is based on international cases, it is suggested to analysis that these cities in transition have achieved development outcome results beyond the expectation, which means the goal of carbon neutral will be an opportunity for all the cities, which will inspire and persuade all the local decision makers to a greatest extent and have the really confidence. So I think not just give us the technical assistance, please show more case and show more story to the local city decision maker. Maybe it will more helpful now. Okay, next one, please. Okay, thanks. Since the time limited, that's all what I want to say today to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zhang Fan. Thanks for sharing the exciting progress that Changsha has made in both early peaking and working towards the development of a 2050 deep decarbonization pathway. Thanks also for sharing your advice for international collaboration around case studies that would be helpful for cities in China. We'll be sure to take note of that. For our second case, it is my pleasure to introduce Yang Shu, manager of the Guangzhou branch of the China Quality Certification Center. Yang Shu has led various climate and policy research projects in Guangdong, China, including work with carbon markets, voluntary emissions reduction schemes, and near zero planning. Yang Shu, welcome, and please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Brent. Good morning and good evening. Thank you for all the participants across different time zones. I'm Yang Shu from the China Quality Certification Center. We are part of the CCIC group, and our team in Guangzhou has been supporting the local governments in setting up low carbon policies, as well as implementing different pilot projects. Today, I'm very happy to share with you the progress and our next steps for the near zero carbon emission zones demonstration project in Guangdong. Next slide, please. So before I go on to the further details, I would like to give you some of the background. Guangdong province is in the very south of China, and it is one of the first low carbon pilot province in China. So it has been carrying out different pilot projects regarding low carbon policies since 2010. So it has been 10 years that various projects has been progressed in Guangdong. And since 2017, China at the national level has signaled that it would like to build 50 near zero carbon emission zones pilots throughout the nation. So Guangdong decided to act first to implement the pilots in Guangdong. But the near zero carbon emission zones pilot should not be built from scratch. So Guangdong decided to build the project based on the previous low carbon pilot work and many of the different technical achievements that has been used in various pilots. So this near zero carbon emission zone demonstration project is a very comprehensive framework that tries to use different methods from industrial energy saving, buildings, transport, renewable energies, agriculture, forestry, waste treatment, etc. And this project aims to reduce the low carbon emissions as much as possible, while at the end, the rest of the emissions can be neutralized through emission trading schemes. So this near zero carbon emission is a process rather than a result, because in the past 5 years, we are very aware that we cannot achieve zero now, but we want to achieve zero in the future. So we want to take it step by step. Next slide, please. So Guangdong decided to take on 6 fields to carry out the demonstration project, including industry, companies, buildings, transport, etc., and communities. So this 6 aspects we have developed the technical roadmap for each aspect. We try to answer the questions about what is near zero carbon emissions and how to achieve it, So we have drafted a technical roadmap for different aspects. To answer what is near zero carbon emission, we developed a standardized evaluation index for these 6 different aspects. And we have a framework to analyze the current emissions versus the future emissions. And then we have defined the evaluation scope and the boundaries for our carbon emissions. And we have set up different targets for the 6 aspects from the near term in 2025, 2035, and the long term 2050. And how to achieve the near zero carbon? In our roadmap, we have identified the mature technologies which can be used now to reduce the emissions, the potential technologies which can be used but may not be commercially available now, and the future technologies which still need technical advancements to achieve. And different technologies have been analyzed about how much emissions it can reduce and how expensive it is and how well the technology can be used in different sectors. We can find more details in our report, which can be downloaded from the Energy Foundation China's website, and we have also published a book in Chinese. Next slide, please. And I would like to share with you some of the pilot cases that has been carried out in Guangzhou. 2 of them are island communities in Guangzhou. One is in Shantou City and the other is in Zhuhai City. So these 2 islands have a common feature that it has a relatively small population and it has very rich resources in offshore and onshore wind energy as well as solar energy. So these 2 small island communities can achieve near zero emissions from its renewable energy production, and because of the there's very few industry activities on the island. Mainly the island has tourism and local communities consumption of energy, so it can achieve zero relatively easily from its current energy plans. So another type of the pilot we have in Guangdong is industrial park, which is a hub for the electronic from the like Amazon and Taobao and Jingdong, this kind of e-commerce. So it's relatively easy to achieve near zero emissions because it can put out many solar panels on all the roofs of the industrial park, and it can electrify all the mobility activities can use electricity. So this industrial park sets up a very good example for how it can provide the best facilities for e-commerce in China. Another type is a community in Zhengchang, which is also mentioned in Stephen's presentation. This community has been very active in setting up all kinds of measures to reduce its emissions, including set up solar panels on the roof to save water in the community, and set up different community activities, including community gardens, community recycling, etc. And then another type of the pilot is the transport hub in Foshan. It also has a very good roof with all the solar panels on the roof, and also it gives the infrastructure for electric buses. And the other one is a community in Shenzhen, which plans to build the community from a very new developed area and with the low emissions targets in mind. So all these pilots that has been carried out in the past 3 years use all the possible ways in renewable energy, provide electric mobility, green buildings, and try to attract low carbon industries, and also in where it's possible, have the forest sink to absorb the greenhouse gas emissions. And throughout this project, with the support from IC, we were able to communicate and exchange our cases with the international community. We have also participated in the COP meetings in Bonn to share the experience from Guangzhou. Next slide, please. So finally, I would like to discuss with the audience how we plan to move the next step. So the above mentioned 6 pilot projects has finished their work this year. So we will conduct an evaluation for the pilot project in Guangzhou and to assess how much emission has been reduced from their cases. And then we will draw on their cases to set up different targets for these different sectors. So how much emissions should be reduced in different cases, how possible they can achieve near zero emissions. And next, we will also continuously to do the literature review and on-site investigation on the cases, both domestically and in other countries, and how do they carry out zero-emission buildings, zero-emission industrial parks, or zero-emission ports. And we try to draw on different references and how Guangdong can achieve better in the next step. And finally, currently we are drawing on recommendation of future work plan in Guangdong, because in the past 5 years, Guangdong has been the front line in China that actually carries out the demonstration project. As far as we know, the national level has already been considering to carry out zero emission industrial parks in the next 5 years in China. So we hope the Guangdong experience can support China in making the national decisions for the zero emissions demonstration project in the next 5 years. And we hope Guangdong can remain the pioneer in the zero emission demonstration project in China. So that's all from my side. If you would like to contact me, next slide please. You can email me or you can follow us on the WeChat. Thank you.
Yanshu, thank you. Thanks for sharing this this presentation of so many examples of what the near zero carbon emission zone in Guangdong has achieved, including a number of exciting pilots that I think are quite important both nationally as well as internationally. So thanks for sharing. Also, thanks for sharing the insight that near zero is a process, not a result. I hope that will be very helpful to many of our practitioners. So now we pivot from early peaking or capping of emissions to long-term strategies and net zero. To kick this off, this is the second section of our webinar. We're going to start with some comments from Richard Barron, the Executive Director of the 2050 Pathways Project. Richard has served as a climate policy advisor to the OECD. He has co-authored several books, including Aligning Policies for a Low Carbon Economy and Investing in Climate, Investing in Growth. Richard, welcome. Richard is joining us via video, so please enjoy.
Good morning and good evening all. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this event organized by ISC, USAID, and the Energy Foundation China. Due to the lateness of the hour here in Paris, I'm sorry for not being able to join live. A word on the 2050 Pathways platform, We are a multi-stakeholder initiative that brought together countries, local governments, and also businesses that think long-term planning is essential to maintaining global climate ambition. We support countries in their efforts to develop long-term, low emissions development strategies as part of the Paris Agreement on climate change. Now, we have come a long way from the Paris Agreement in 2015, where an explicit reference to net zero was, to be frank, vehemently opposed, and countries could only agree to a rather oblique reference to achieving a balance of sinks and sources. Net zero emissions has become undoubtedly the benchmark for ambitious long-term climate action and is expected to be a major theme at the COP in Glasgow this year. The momentum for net zero targets has been growing rapidly, starting with the European Union pledging for net zero greenhouse gases by 2050, the announcement by Chinese President Xi at the UN General Assembly last year, followed by Japan and South Korea, and the US inauguration next week will be another addition to that. Indeed, President-elect Biden has pledged to have the US reach net zero by 2050. So at this point, more than 3/5 of global emissions and 3/4 of global GDP are now covered by long-term net zero targets. Our role at the 2050 Pathways platform is to make sure that these goals are backed by strong policy plans and drive changes starting now. The countries are not alone in this move to net zero, of course. They are being backed by many initiatives of non-state actors. This includes the Race to Zero, a global campaign bringing together thousands of subnational governments and private sector actors committed to reaching net zero before 2050. We see USAID Low Emission Cities Alliance as another great initiative in this space. Even in some countries that do not yet have a national net zero target, these non-state actors are leading the way. As an example, a number of Indian companies are adopting net zero emission or 100% renewable energy goals. And this can only help the country move in this direction as a whole. And we see similar developments in Australian states as another example. But I would say that even in countries that have adopted these ambitious targets, local governments can make a significant difference by bringing forward many of the innovative, more climate-friendly solutions. Local governments make planning and investment decisions and can send a signal to industry, to services, to the agricultural sector that their future markets are in low carbon. You can start procuring more low carbon cement and steel for your bridges and buildings. You can increase the share of locally sourced agricultural products for schools and universities. You can act to reduce and recycle waste. You can invent urban planning to make your cities less carbon intensive and more resilient to climate change. So it is your initiatives that are a prerequisite to triggering many of the solutions that we must roll out at global level. And I believe this is an area where cities in different countries can and must share experience. In Europe, we have seen cities in different countries teaming up to create a single market for low emission buses. They created the critical mass that attracted the interest of the private sector to invent those new solutions. Now, we all know that the low carbon transition will not be a smooth ride. Trade issues are increasingly present in our discussions on how to achieve deep decarbonization. But cities are not engaged in such competition. I believe you have much policy advice to share with local governments in other countries. They face the same demand from their citizens for better quality of life and ultimately a safer climate. On this note, I wish you a good discussion today and look forward to hearing back on your debates. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard, for the video, for offering a global backdrop to net zero planning, and for outlining helpful initiatives and platforms that are underway to support long-term strategy planning, and for underscoring the importance of sharing learnings and case studies across the globe. Up next, it's my pleasure to introduce Frederick Hans to offer our long-term strategies visionary keynote. Frederick Hans is a climate policy analyst at New Climate Institute. His work focuses on tracking international climate action and conducting quantitative analysis of GHG trajectory scenarios and global emissions reduction efforts. welcome Frederick. Frederick will also join us via video.
Good morning and good evening also from my side. Apologies that I can't be in person here at the webinar, given that the time difference between Beijing and Berlin is a bit too much. My name is Frederick Hans. I'm a climate policy analyst at New Climate Institute, and I will speak on the relevance of long-term planning to deliver on the Paris Agreement goals. And I would first like to quickly recap of what we have seen in terms of momentum for aspirations of net zero by mid-century, by cities, regions, and countries, and then introduce 3 key concepts that we have recently been kind of advocating for, how such long-term planning towards a net zero society can be conducted, and then finalize my presentation with some concluding remarks. So first, the science and particularly also the latest IPCC special report on 1.5 degree of 2018 tells us that we need to initiate a transition in the different sectors as fast as possible, and that we need to reach net zero carbon emissions by mid-century in order to keep the Paris Agreement's temperature limit of well below 2 degrees Celsius, and with the sort of aspiration to reach 1.5 within reach. And what we have seen over the last 12 months is that more and more actors and jurisdictions have been committing to an aspiration to have a net zero target. So for instance, here with cities and regions, we have seen that more than 800 cities worldwide and more than 100 regions worldwide have already committed to such targets or have pledged to become net zero. Of course, that doesn't say anything about the quality of those targets and how these targets have been developed or how they've been backed up by action on the ground. But it's still very interesting to see that sort of momentum. And also at the national level with countries, there has been some speak of a wave of net zero announcements, particularly in the second half of last year. Most prominently, of course, as all of you are aware, China with its announcement at the UN General Assembly, but also Japan, South Korea, and others. And for instance, here we see that if we consider those announcements that have been made today, including European Union, including China, and others, this already covers half of the world's emissions today. And if we then also include the United States, where President-elect Joe Biden has pledged also to promote such a net zero target. Of course, we don't know whether this will be then implemented, but that would then already cover 60% of the worldwide emissions only at the national level. So this is quite a bit. We, in the Climate Action Tracker, we have estimated what these net zero targets would mean if, and of course, these are a lot of big ifs, but what they would mean in terms of impact on global warming by end of century. And we find that the global warming would be about 2.1 degrees Celsius by end of century if all those targets would be implemented. And of course, there is a striking difference then between the temperature estimates when looking at currently implemented policies that would bring us to about 3 degrees of global warming pre-industrial levels. So certainly that shows also that there's a gap between the sort of aspirational targets, long-term targets, and the action right now happening on the ground. Just on a side note here, we also, of course, particularly looked at China's carbon neutrality announcement, and that announcement alone would reduce the temperature estimate by 0.2 to 0.3 degrees Celsius. So that's quite a bit, of course, and thus also very important to further investigate once more details about the plan to achieve that becomes available. But the big question is then how can this vision of a net zero society that now many actors have been articulating, how can that be become a reality or be made a reality through robust and inclusive long-term planning? And in this context, we have recently published a guide for policymakers that was mainly aiming at policymakers at the national level, but also holds great value, we think, at the regional and city level. We are advocating for three concepts and interlinked concepts. So the first of them would be iterative revision cycles of long-term strategies and planning processes. The second one, building up on that, would be to factor in context-specific circumstances and respective starting points by the respective jurisdictions. And then the last concept would be to consider or to apply these country-specific circumstances for key aspects that are very relevant, we think relevant, to engage in long-term planning and work towards such a vision of a net zero society. And we will quickly dive into each of that concepts within the next 10 minutes. So first, the idea of iterative revision cycles. Here our proposal, as you can see on the slide, was that at the national level, we are advocating for having updated long-term strategies and of course the respective planning processes as well, in line with the updates of nationally determined contributions. So every 5 years, to really allow to have an up-to-date planning and to have up-to-date long-term strategies that account really for developments at the technological area and in society, etc. So to really be able to account those and not just treat a long-term strategy or long-term planning as a one-off exercise, but really to engage in iterative revision cycles. And although, of course, that was an idea here very specifically under the UNFCCC for countries, we think that in general, also at the regional or city level, it's very important and also very beneficial to have these iterative revision cycles to really keep planning up to date, to account for latest science and latest developments, and also to identify key challenges in fields of action that are most relevant at a given point in time, because of course they might then differ or become different ones if countries or cities or regions progress with their transitions in the respective sectors. And it also allows to align these long-term strategies with other processes and strategies. So that's the first concept. The second one, and then very closely interlinked to this, is what we call the 3 levels of comprehensiveness. And that is really an idea to acknowledge and account for different starting points that cities or regions or countries might be in when now starting to engage in their long-term planning and develop their long-term strategies. So for instance, here at the most sort of basic version, or the base version as we call it, that would be really a case where a jurisdiction has limited resources available to date to develop a long-term strategy and the respective planning processes, but then having the opportunity again, and this is where it links to the first concept, to engage in the iterative revision cycle, to then develop a more intermediate version, and also then in the long run, a more detailed version. Of course, those jurisdictions that already have the resources and capabilities, they should directly aim for a more detailed one that is then also updated in subsequent revision cycles. But that's a bit the idea that we are advocating for. And the specific circumstances or characteristics based on which one can decide what to aim for are, for instance, the technical and financial resources that are currently available to government agency and researchers to, for instance, conduct in-depth thematic analyses or scenario analysis. Can be the human resources available within governmental agencies for political coordination and stakeholder consultation. And of course, it can also be the political mandate and leadership to actually be able to reach a consensus about a long-term vision. So these are really for different factors that might determine what a city, a region, or a country can do at this moment in time. But then, of course, also transparently outlining how one goes about it in the future, so that one can sort of move up and add more robustness and more details to the long-term strategy and the respective planning processes. And the third concept, that's then really basically applying these 3 levels of comprehensiveness to key aspects that we have identified in the literature as being sort of most relevant to consider. And to consider when engaging in a planning process and a respective long-term strategy development. And I would like to quickly go through them, of course, only rather superficial in the context of today's presentation, but of course you can find also significantly more information than in the guide itself. To start with, we think that a very essential part, considering that we see a long-term strategy as an ongoing visionary process to define what the aspiration is, that for each of those versions, regardless of which version one aims for, there should be a robust process to involve different stakeholders, to have an extensive coordination effort, to really be able to coordinate and to also have the groundwork to find a consensus. And that's particularly also important when engaging in such an exercise as a country or region or city for the first time, to really be able to build that groundwork, then also for future iterative revision cycles. The second aspect we look at is the theoretical long-term scenario analysis. And here, for instance, we propose that sort of differentiation that could be applied. So in a more base version context, to acknowledge scientific findings, perhaps not be able to have city-specific Paris Agreement aligned scenarios or different scenarios, but first and foremost acknowledge those scientific findings, and also point at the lack of understanding of how something like this then can be implemented or can transcend to a city or region level. But of course then in future iterative revisions to then add more detail, add more analyses, etc. And have that, for instance, in an intermediate or more detailed version, then more robust, and also allow more informed policy making on these grounds. So that's the second aspect. The third aspect that has been identified in the literature is then, of course, having specific long-term greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, and also other non-greenhouse gas emission targets, like the phase out of combustion engines, for instance. And also here, countries, cities, regions, they might be at very different starting points, and sometimes perhaps just at the moment in a position to make statements of intentions to fully decarbonize without the specific knowledge of how they can actually pull that off. But then, of course, one might also have different options to include indicative targets, or then, of course, in an ideal setup, to have targets that are also then legally enshrined in legislation, so that they become also mandatory or become also more robust. And this is also something that we have been recently working on to define different criteria for such long-term targets, to make them as transparent as possible, and to be really clear of what do they mean in terms of reductions, in terms of removals, in terms of transparency, etc. So different aspects that can be considered here, but are very important then when also communicating such targets to different stakeholders in an international audience. The fourth aspect is the sectoral coverage. Of course, it's clear the more the better, or it should be fully comprehensive ideally. But also here, the case might be that in certain contexts, it might be some focus sectors first, and then adding more and more over time. But of course, ideally, the coverage of emissions in sectors and gases should be as comprehensive as possible. The fifth aspect, and that's also a very important one, is to explain and analyze how the long-term target then sort of links back to immediate action and interim targets. For instance, medium-term targets by 2030 or 2040. So also to really add detail and robustness how such a target can be achieved. And also this, of course, can be something that in an iterative process then gets more and more elaborated over time, but of course being very important to have that on the radar and have that also transparently explained, so that it can also be understood, for instance, on a sector level, for example, how such a sector can decarbonize and what intermediate targets and actions are, and how today's actions are aligned with such a long-term vision. The mobilization of finance and technology, of course, is crucial for many cities, regions, countries. And also there within the guide, we provide some ideas on how that can be done. So to really identify how finance and technology can first and foremost be mobilized at the domestic level, to identify the key fields of action given the status quo, for instance, in different sectors. And then based on these assessments, really identify, okay, what sort of additional support do we need right now to address the challenges that we face? And of course, again, those might change slightly then over time when the transitions progress in the different sectors. So also something like this then can be then better reflected in future versions of the long-term strategy and the respective planning processes. Another very important aspect, and that's the seventh one that we list, is the consideration of sustainable development and just transition, to really mainstream the idea of sustainable development and consider respective social policies, labor market policies, educational policies, to manage, to actively and proactively manage a just transition in the respective jurisdiction, and be aware of what impacts, also negative impacts it might have for certain communities, and to be really be able to also include that in the planning process, and of course then also in the strategy itself. And with that coming also to the last point, and that of course closely relates to the concept 1 and 2. So if we engage in such a process, it is very important to have a very clear and transparent outlook. So to communicate what is our intention to go from here, and to revise that over time, and also make a sort of credible commitment that we won't just stop short at a base or intermediate version, but we're going forward, and we also identifying what additional sort of support, for instance, to do scenario analysis to develop the strategy might be required. And these are the sort of 8 different aspects that we looked at, that we identified in the literature and also in our work, and that we consider as very important. And with that, I would really like to come to the sort of key messages, the concluding remarks of that presentation. So first of all, again, and I think most of us are very much aware of it, that science tells us and demonstrates the need for that rapid transition in order to be able to limit global warming below 1.5 degrees. And that the accelerated momentum at the national and subnational level has really increased, and we see more and more actors committing to it. But in order to make that reality, that we propose basically the 3 concepts of iterative revision cycles. So to be able to further adjust, to demonstrate that the long-term planning will be kept up to date, that with the second concept, that there can be different levels of comprehensiveness. So there's no one size fits it all concept, but it's really about acknowledging where we start and where we stand and what we know, and sort of the robustness in terms of information, in terms of analyses, etc., that we have right now, and to consider that, and then having these 8 aspects as concept 3, and to really be able to have context specific considerations for this, and then advancing on them going forward. So this is sort of our inputs to these discussions. Thank you very much for the invitation to present here today. Of course, I am available for any further follow-up questions or discussions that you would like to have, particularly because I can't be here in person today. But yeah, I wish a very interesting panel discussion, and looking forward to watch the recording. Thank you very much.
Frederick, thanks so much for the video. This has really helped demystify the process of developing long-term strategies. It's very helpful to suggest the benefits of using an iterative approach, of really breaking the planning down into smaller components, and also opening up multiple levels of comprehensiveness. It's also, I think, very helpful to suggest how to link short-term strategies with long-term strategies, so that hopefully everything over time does come together with greater coherence. So thanks for all of those very concrete suggestions. Now we're shifting to the final section of the webinar, and it's my pleasure to open up our distinguished panelists to kick off our panel. To the webinar attendees, I welcome you to submit questions to the panel. Feel free to do that. We have designed this panel in order to offer diverse perspectives from within China as well as from across the globe. And all of our panelists are climate planning practitioners who operate in the trenches, so they're able to share advice from their hands-on work. Our first panelist is Mr. Liu Xiedu, the lead climate change specialist at the East Asian Department of the Asian Development Bank. Liu Xiedu, welcome. Liu Xiedu has advised ADB on carbon markets, technology transfer, and other climate change business since 2010. Prior to joining ADB, he served the government of the People's Republic of China in research, policymaking, and international negotiations on climate change. Liu Xiedu has published more than 30 academic papers and 7 books. Liu Xiedu, welcome. Our next panelist, I'll just quickly proceed with the introductions, is Yang Xiu, the Associate Professor at the Institute of Climate Change and Sustainable Development at Tsinghua University. Yang Xiu's research focuses on energy economics, energy and environmental policy, and climate change strategy. She has led many national and provincial level energy and climate change policy research projects. Yang Xiu, welcome. Our next panelist is Lin Weiwei, Program Officer for the Low Emission Cities, or the Low Carbon Cities Program at Energy Foundation China. Weiwei manages EFC's China Implementation Initiative. She brings over 15 years of hands-on experience in low carbon urbanization, environmental policy, research, strategy, and pilot implementation. Weiwei, welcome.
Thank you, Brian.
Our next panelist is Dr. Pan Tao, ISC's Urban Director in China. Pan Tao brings over a decade of applied experience in environmental planning and management, energy efficiency, and GHG reduction initiatives in cities across China, focusing on bridging the gap between policy and practice. Pan Tao, welcome. And our final panelist is Kelly Levin, Senior Associate with the World Resource Institute Global Climate Program. Kelly's work focuses on supporting countries in the design and tracking of climate commitments, as well as planning for long-term transitions associated with decarbonization. Today, Kelly is rounding out our panel by sharing experiences at the national level and sharing experiences from outside of China. So we're very happy to have you. Welcome, Kelly. So I'll dive straight in with our first question, and it focuses on early peaking. So for rapidly growing economies and energy intensive manufacturing with heavy infrastructure investment, contexts like China, capping emissions presents a major challenge. How do you assess the progress of jurisdictions in moving towards peaking or capping of emissions, and what learnings are coming out of this? Liu Xiedu, would you like to start? I think you're muted still, Liu Xiedu.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Brent. First of all, many thanks to IC, USAID, and Energy Foundation Beijing for the kind invitation to me and to ADB to join this very interesting and also very important workshop. And personally, that I enjoy very much in the past years working with the IS team in many occasions that that's joint event or project with ADB. So many thanks. And on your question on this, and my observation is that say the many countries in particular that the government of the People's Republic of China announcement on this early peaking and also carbon neutrality in the past several months, then also followed by Korea, Japan, and also other countries, including the further enhancement of the commitment by EU on the Paris Agreement. We saw this is really very positive political momentum to achieve the goal of carbon peaking neutrality. And also, if I just look at maybe very closely in the follow-up actions only in case in China, that the many central government and also the local government now are taking actions, actually very urgent actions that to formulate their 14th five-year plan, no matter it's the line ministries in central government and also the local government. So we can see that at the political level and also the policy level and planning level, that this is very positive and also significant progress making or advancing. Of course, that we believe that there will be no very easy way to achieve the goal, no matter it's carbon peaking or the carbon neutrality. It will be a long way to go. But the start looks quite good, quite positive. So we really very happy to see this momentum and also this movement. That's my observation. Thank you. Back to you.
Great,
Brad.
terrific. So it sounds like we're making good progress towards peaking as well as near zero. Happy to hear that. Yangshuo, what are your perspectives? And feel free either peaking or capping of emissions, or feel free to jump right into net zero. How are we doing? What are the challenges? What's your advice?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Brent. Hello, good evening and good morning. I'm Yang Xiu from Tsinghua University. Actually, from my point of view, I regard the carbon peaking and the decarbonization. I think there should not be major differences. The two concepts are only different milestones on the same pathway. So I would like to speak these two concepts together to answer the two questions together. I think from my observation, I think China has defined the goal and direction of achieving neutrality by 2060. And also the statement has been declared by President Xi on 7 international occasions. So this has been confirmed very much. So, and also at the end of the last year, China has held the Central Economic Work Conference, which has made important arrangement for the recent economic development. And carbon peaking as well as carbon neutrality is one of the 8 key tasks to promote the work of economic growth. This means China, and this is the first time that carbon is mentioned in the economic work conference. So this means China will make advanced plans and active actions as a major content of the current national policy. So this is my observation. The ministries and the commissions has under the central government level will take concrete policies and actions to put forward this carbon peaking and neutrality into from our observation, we find that they can be summarized into 8 aspects, including establishing policies and industry of a carbon peaking action plan, adjust and optimize industrial structure, optimize energy structure, strengthen the mechanism of controlling the total energy consumption intensity and as well as carbon intensity, improve and expand the carbon emission trading system, a collaborative response to climate change and environmental equality improvement. Also develop of carbon absorption technology and strengthening of CO2 greenhouse gas emissions, non-CO2 greenhouse gas emissions. And we also noticed that several industries and even state-owned companies have declared their own carbon neutrality declarations. In this way, it can be seen that China has not only taken carbon emission control as a measure to deal with climate change, but also regarded as the direction of economic development, and also to create international competitiveness facing the future. So on this basis, I think an important challenge which also faced to the central government and also to the local government. It also is a suggestion from me that we should formulate the development plan to look at the long-term strategy rather than near-term, and we should think about decarbonization rather than peaking. So we look straight to the carbon neutrality. We should think about 20, 30, or even 40 years later. By that time, our country, our city is at what level of development, what kind of lifestyle, and what kind of economic system. This should be deployed as a direction. In other words, I think long-term strategy is the target and short-term policies are only steps. I can give you an example. In order to reach the peak,
we want to hear from other panels, Yang Shou, but thanks for starting with those points, for sharing that, of course, there's alignment between near-term and long-term strategies, and the ultimate vision is to align economic growth with near zero. I think those are great suggestions. Maybe we jump to Kelly to sort of broaden out and get some more international, global perspective around peaking or near zero. Kelly, curious your thoughts on the challenges, progress we're making, any advice you may have.
Thanks so much, and thanks for your kind invitation to be here. I would definitely agree with the last two panelists, both the point that we are seeing tremendous political momentum and also the really great importance of linking short and long-term planning processes, both so that long-term planning processes don't sit on a shelf and don't actually influence short-term decision-making, but also that short-term decision-making is conducted in a way that's consistent with long-term goals, because there are many ways to hit short-term targets, for example, that don't actually unleash the type of innovation and deep decarbonization technologies, behavior, norms, et cetera, that would be required to get to net zero 2 decades later. We did an analysis of peaking and looked at how peaking in various countries changed over time. And it's a very interesting story and one that's both positive and negative at the same time. So by 1990, we had 19 countries that had peaked emissions. This was representing 21% of global emissions. And 20 years later, by 2010, that number grew to 48 countries, and that represented 36% of global emissions. At that point in 2010, you had 39 of the world's 43 developed countries that would have already peaked, but you already also started to see developing countries like Brazil, for example, the first major emitting developing country to peak and meet its maximum level in 2004 of emissions. By 2020, if all of the data come in and countries have met their pledges, and certainly with the effects of the pandemic, 40% of global emissions are expected to come from countries that would have peaked emissions. And by 2030, given the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions on the table, we're expecting 52 countries representing 60% of emissions would have peaked. And this includes not only every developed country except for Turkey, but also developing countries, obviously, including China, Brazil, Mexico, Korea, and several others. And this trend, is tremendously encouraging. And if you couple it with the tremendous momentum around net zero, I think we are really turning a corner. At the same time, to meet the Paris Agreement goals, global greenhouse gas emissions would need to peak way before 2030. So it just shows that there is significant, more action that needs to happen. And I guess just one last point is that I think the year of emissions is important, but equally important is the level at which emissions peak and the rate of decarbonization afterwards, because what is going to determine temperature increase is going to be cumulative emissions, which will look at that curve. So I think focusing on the year is important, but it's equally important to look at the emissions level and decarbonization rates. So I'll pause here. Thanks, Brent.
Terrific. Thank you for sharing that that broad perspective on the acceleration of peaking, but also the challenges around level and rates of the decrease in GHG levels. Let me jump to Wei Wei. I guess Wei Wei, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts from your view with Energy Foundation around this topic of progress against early peaking, progress against net zero, and in particular, any challenges or advice that you'd like to share.
Okay, thank you, Brent. Good morning and good evening to everyone. I'm Lin Wei, the Program Officer of Energy Foundation. Thank you for giving me this great opportunity to share some of my views and working experience on the city peaking works. So go to Brent's question. So firstly, I want to express some of my insights on the challenge that China is facing on carbon peaking. I used to working on cities carbon peaking projects, and from city level, I think there's several challenges. The first one is the cities need to avoid the carbon leakage. It means that a city's carbon peak is not equal to China realized peak. We need to notice the boundary and the scope of city peak. For example, so if for an industrial city, they can easily to realize city carbon peak by just moving high industry factories to other cities. But that doesn't mean China can realize carbon peak. So also this kind of easily shut down the plant or moving the factories to other cities mean nothing to China peak. So firstly, we need to avoid the carbon linkage. The second challenge is I perceived is that we need to avoid high level city peaking. A lot of cities may think to raise their carbon emission to a historical high level, then they can easily to realize the carbon peak. But this is not correct, as the curve will not easily to drop down if they raise the carbon emission to a high level. So this is the second one I think we need to avoid, to tell the real story and the truth that we need to recognize the city carbon emission, the nature of city carbon emission, to not increase the carbon emission to the high level. This is the second challenge I'm pursued. The third one is that regarding the capacity, I think currently there's a lack of capacity in the field to do on-the-ground implementation for the measures and technologies to help cities of China to realize carbon peak. Okay, I'm stop here and leave more time to the other experts.
Terrific. Well, it was all sounding a little too easy, and I think you definitely unpacked a number of the weak links, the likelihood of displacement or the challenge of displacement, capacity challenges. You also mentioned, similar to Kelly, the critical question of the level of the peak and how that, if that's too high, then early peaking may sound better than it is. So excellent insights. Let's jump to Pantao. Welcome your thoughts around peaking, net zero, and the associated challenges and advice for our audience.
Thank you. So, I'm the technical lead of a LICA program. So in the past 4 years, so I have the opportunities to work on this 13 cities, especially there are 8 cities. We have worked together with cities and our partners to develop early picking plan. So throughout the years, I think we have some experience, and also I would like to deliver some key message. First message is the early picking is not easy. The background is the city is still in the fast economic development. So in the next 5 years, all the city expected the economy is still growing like a 6% every year or 7%. This is also a tremendous comparing to global cities. And also our population also growing, especially in the big city. So all the city expect 1% population growth every year, even more, especially for the big cities, mega cities, So this is the basic fact, we have to consider. And also, according to the scenarios we make for the city, we made a scenario for 2020, 2025 to 2030 towards 2050. If we consider this a business as usual scenario, we use Changsha city as an example. There were no peak before 2030. The peak will be 2035. Okay, and also, but good news is that we also have a scenario that can peak the city emission, like mentioned again, like Changsha. If 2025, it can reach its peak, but a lot of work has been done. A lot of climate actions has been accelerated. So it's not easy task. Okay. The second message is really the indicators are very important. The quantifiable indicators are very, very important. So the lucky thing is we use modeling. So we use LEAP model. It's able to enable us to extract the data from the model. And then we are able to set up the indicators for every year for the city. So the city decision maker can easily monitor the progress of the climate actions. Yeah, for example, how many new capacity of renewables, solar, wind should be installed every year, or how many EV cars can be on the street. Yeah. So these all indicators for us is we can extract the data from the model and then suggest to the city. So the indicators are important. The third thing is really focus on actions. We know that it's not easy, and also when we monitor the progress, because we start from 2015 level, and then now it's 2020. If you continue to monitor that, we already found out there's something lag behind, especially concerning the climate action. For example, the new installation of renewables is lag behind at the city level. Now, it's really lag behind. Also, green buildings. There's some challenges, especially in terms of climate action. So somehow we need to accelerate the climate actions. Yeah, this is my stream message. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing that again. You know, a set of I think very real challenges facing not only with peaking planning or capping emissions, but also with near zero. I guess I wanted to come back to the suggestion that a number of you had made around integrating peaking planning with long-term strategies or net zero, and sort of get your thoughts on really how to do that effectively, to the degree that we're dealing with different timeframes, different issues. And Kelly, you mentioned the potential for a discordance between certain short-term plans that, in a sense, might prioritize solutions that are really not aligned with long-term goals in terms of achieving near zero or net zero. And also, Yang Xiu, you know, your suggestion, well, let's just cut to the chase and really focus more, center this work around net zero and then back into peaking and shorter term plans as a step in the direction. I guess I'm curious your thoughts on how well these plans are being harmonized, or advice for how to best align between peaking plans and longer term strategies involving deep decarbonization. Who'd like to take that? Kelly, we'll start with you.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's a really fundamental question, and I think there you could probably see three different camps of jurisdictions. You know, one where there is a long-term plan, but maybe perhaps not a very concrete short-term plan. One that these two processes to design net zero or long-term plan are running in parallel with designing strategies for peaking emissions or kind of short-term ambition enhancement, and one in which there's a real focus on the short term, but maybe not concrete plans on the long term. And I think they have different opportunities, and certainly, you know, one plan shouldn't hold another one up. But at the same time, you know, there can be many different benefits, especially in terms of efficiency, if you think about the planning process. And there are a few different ways in which you could bring these processes together. You know, first is in terms of the governance of the planning process. So one could be in terms of the leadership of that. Often these are happening in different institutions with different people. And to the extent that there's an opportunity to bring those teams together, that could be a tremendous opportunity. The second related to governance is with public participation processes, to make sure that there is a dialogue around this kind of long-term journey that many of the panelists had talked about. And you could align the participation process as well. The next is around modeling and analysis. And we're seeing some of the countries that we've worked with where they're undertaking the modeling and analysis jointly between, for example, an NDC update, as well as a long-term strategy. Some countries where they're using completely different scenarios, completely different models, but to the extent that there's an opportunity to bring those analyses together and harmonize it, certainly would help understand the implications of long-term planning on short-term ambition and vice versa in terms of how hard it would be. And related, then looking at the way in which a short-term target, a short-term peaking date, impacts the rate of decarbonization afterwards. You know, is it something that's achievable or not? And I guess the other piece of this just could be looking at the lock-in potential and impact of policies and actions, and seeing to what extent they facilitate this deep decarbonization trajectory, or really could present hurdles to that in the analysis.
Very helpful. Liu Xiedu, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a really very important point that really how to, I guess this will relate to if this goal or the commitment would be effectively implemented. My observation is that there are several points. I guess the mostly one of the very important points related to the mindset change. I believe it will be extremely difficult that in particular for those lower level, say government or the community. I think this traditional force is very strong, and if we really want to this transition to low carbon to the net zero emission development, if we cannot make people change their mindset for this, it will be extremely difficult to implement. Then this view closely related to the capacity building, in particular for those lower level government, community, and so on. So this institutional and personal awareness improvement, I think also very important. Number one. Number two, I think related to those enforcement or enforced implementation of those policies or the political commitment. Many countries have this high level political commitment, and then also the central government or the federal government have their policy strategy and so on. But would this policy strategy be implemented at lower level government, at the community? That's a big question mark. So enforced implementation or enforcement of those would be very important point. And then if I add another point is related to these solutions. Now I don't think that those a single solution would help. No matter it's a single energy efficiency product or only this photo PV production and so on, all those. It must be the holistic solutions for this normally it's carbon peaking or carbon neutrality. So then this view have to build this eco society environment. Otherwise, it will not work. So these 3 points, I guess it will be very important. That's my observation. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you. Wei, I think we need to take a question from the audience, but I'm happy to come back to you. But I do want to draw in another topic from the audience. So we have a question about essentially, what does this mean for people as we're rebuilding our economies and our energy systems? How do we address just transition in our long-term planning? We've heard this touched upon by a variety of speakers. Kelly, you touched on it. I guess I'm curious from the panelists what your thoughts are on how we really integrate people. You mentioned this, Lucia, do yourself around eco society and essentially ensuring that last mile participation in these initiatives. Wanted to open this up for your thoughts around sort of how we're engaging communities and how we're ensuring just transition through these larger planning processes. Who'd like to come in on that? Let's go to Yang Xiu. You haven't spoken in a little bit, please.
Okay, thank you. I would like to share my point of view. The social equity is really a hot topic when we talk about the transition. But I think from China's experience, from a macroscopic perspective, the policy and actions to address climate change will not impede the economic development as well as social welfare. Instead, they will help raise the the quality of economic growth and boost new industries and provide electric access to all the places, create new jobs, and improve the ecological environment, and also improve the health and bring some synergy benefits. And it's also good for well-being for future generations. So this is from the macroscopic perspective. But from a microscopic perspective, there are some problems exist. I think this is not only the government responsibility, the whole society need to balance more. I think after year 2020, the whole atmosphere has formed for the transformation, and we see that all the industry sectors and companies and the new generation has moved. So I think the society should boost new jobs in green and low carbon industries, and should provide education and training for new industry for the people that work for the new job. And more things need to do, but I think we need time. And regarding to link to the last question, I think since the atmosphere is formed, the transformation needs time. We can not only find solutions from top down, but also bottom up. This is a work for responsibility from all the stakeholders, not only the government, but also industry sectors, think tank, and even the public. And we should encourage, pay more attention to encourage the new generation and women. So that's my point of view.
Well, very encouraging that there are many opportunities, and it's really important to work top down and bottom up. That's excellent advice. Any other thoughts on this? And Wei, I'll give you the final word. But any other comments on just transition before I hand to Wei?
Okay, thank you, Brand. My understanding how to link the long-term plan with the short-term actions. I think in China, cities is a good platform or venue. City can be pioneered to this kind of actions, such as for the cities which has already realized the carbon peak. They can now to lay out the comprehensive study on carbon neutrality and to interpret what the carbon neutrality for the city, like what the energy structure it will look like for the city, what is the transportation structure will look like for the city. So city can be the pioneer for such things, and with cities, with the confidence from the city practices, I think China can start the concrete roadmap and actions towards carbon neutrality. Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay. Well, we have 1 or 2 minutes if there's any final comments from the panelists, but thanks so much for sharing that, Wei. That reminds me of Richard's comment earlier that cities can play a critical role in driving innovation that can be applicable nationally. So I welcome if anyone has a quick final comment, and then I'll wrap up.
Yeah, may I say just a few sentences?
Go ahead.
We have done a lot of work on the early picking, and also we are moving forward towards a deep decarbonization and carbon neutrality. So our study in Changsha City, that it shows that if we just follow early picking action, is not enough for the future deep decarbonization. So there's a lot of challenges in deep decarbonization. And also this is an attitude that I want to convey, that we really is getting to know the unknowns. There's a lot of technical development in the future, social changes. It's really, our attitude is really getting to know the unknowns, and then put into the long-term strategy plan, and then hopefully, we can have a bright future. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Well, let me extend a warm thank you to all of the panelists for your insights. I wish we had more time to go deeper. You've really brought some, I think, very helpful and different perspectives to our audience. So thanks so much. I hope we'll have an opportunity to convene a panel down the line and go deeper in many of these topics. So we're at time. In closing, I'd like to thank our speakers, panelists, and all of our participants for your contributions and excellent questions. I'd like to thank again our event sponsors, USAID and Energy Foundation China. We've covered a lot of ground today and have shared many practical insights into the planning of both capping emissions and ultimately working towards net zero. We've seen from the LECA program that cities can dramatically accelerate their progress towards reduced emissions through use of standardized tools, trainings, and case studies. And today we've heard again and again the importance of sharing case studies from throughout the world. We've heard this from almost every speaker. And we've also heard that it's very important to integrate our shorter term peaking plans with long-term deep decarbonization planning. To quote again Yang Shu, near zero is a process rather than a result. So as Frederick mentioned, we need to approach this iteratively in a way that we're coordinating all of our relevant efforts. And while long-term planning is essential for climate action, we must also manage a just transition by centering people in the process. We're able to achieve green and sustainable development while at the same time advancing social justice and equity. So this webinar has been recorded and will be shared with all registered attendees and will be posted on the ISC event website. Thanks again to all of you and good night.